everybody, you're back for our Sawjac13 review, and this time I'm reviewing the movie Watchmen, based on the popular graphic novel. In my previous reviews I've said the plot, the summary, storyline, whatever you want to call it. I'm not going to do that anymore, so if you want the story, look into the description. Okay, now I'm going to say what worked, and what I thought of the film. Okay, as a huge fan of the graphic novel, like most of you out there, I can describe the movie in 2 words. Astoundingly amazing. This movie, it was exactly like the book. It was just right on. Mostly every single detail was in this movie. It's like anybody has been saying, it's as close as anyone could possibly get to Watchmen with the film. Watchmen is considered to be unfilmable for the past 20-something years, and now it is filmable. The Watchmen movie can be made. Now let's take a look at what worked in this movie. Well, the casting was almost perfectly on. The character that mostly stands out in this movie is, of course, Rorschach, who's played by Jackie Earle Haley, who was in a movie 3 years ago called Little Children, but before that he was out of the spotlight for nearly 30 years. And I guess this was sort of his comeback movie, or Little Children was, but this is probably his best performance yet as Rorschach. He brought the character to life so well. It's like you could take a Rorschach out of the book and throw him out into the real world. It was exactly like that. And Dr. Manhattan, not so much. I didn't have a problem with his voice. He sounded sort of like this, with a very soft and light voice like that. That really didn't work. That was sort of mediocre. I think Dr. Manhattan could have had a much better actor. Oh, and Malin Ackerman needs to sort of learn how to cry. The visual effects in this movie, the visual effects deserve an immediate Oscar. The visual effects were stunning, and some of the critics are saying that the fortress that Dr. Manhattan built on Mars, they're saying it's distractingly cartoony. Well, it may be cartoony, but if it's following the material from the book, it works. Most of the critics who say Watchmen was terrible probably haven't even read Watchmen yet. And Zack Snyder did 300, and a lot of people were concerned about all the slow motion that was in 300, complaining about how much slow motion is there going to be in Watchmen. I just want to say this, and there was very, very little slow motion in Watchmen. There are only a few action scenes in the movie where it just slows it down a bit, so that way you can see how perfectly choreographed it is, and then it puts it back into normal speed. So there's very little slow motion, this way you don't need to worry about that. Except in the very beginning where the comedian is fighting the guy who was breaking into his house. There's sort of one too many slow motion scenes in that part. Now, a lot of the complaints I've heard that from mostly the critics is that all the material is outdated. The Bob Dylan references, the World War III conspiracies, all that Russian stuff, they say it's outdated. Well, the whole point of to make this movie was to refresh it, and did it work? Of course it did. So, how can I say this? It brought back classic memoirs, or whatever you want to call them, from previous generations and previous decades, brought it back and refreshed it into this movie, because this movie does take place in an alternate reality of 1985. And one thing that I could tell in the movie was that all the events were in order. I could tell when, like in the book, I could tell when Chapter 1 began, Chapter 1 ended, Chapter 2 began, Chapter 2 ended, and so on and so on. I knew what chapter sequences happened and in what order they were happening. And one thing that bothered me was that Chapter 9 and Chapter 10 were sort of mixed together. They weren't happening in order. And I've also heard that the ending changed. Well, I heard that rumor a few months ago when people saying, oh, the ending changed. I was like, what? The ending didn't change. What are these people talking about? And when I heard from several critics and people who have seen the movie, they confirmed that the ending actually did change. I was like, the ending is what makes Watchmen, so how is this going to work? And I was very skeptical about this, just like any other superhero movie. But the ending they went with, you get exactly the same feel from this ending, just like the ending you did get in the book. And there are also a couple key elements that were in the book in the ending that are in the movie at the ending. I'm not going to spoil them because they're sort of big spoilers, so I'll just leave you to see the movie, or until I do a spoiler review. This movie was shot in Vancouver in Canada, and I have to say that whatever place in Vancouver they shot it in, it looked exactly like New York did in the 1980s. Is there anything about the movie I don't like? Well, when Dr. Manhattan's like reviewing his past, like when he's with Janie Slater, you hear Philip Glass's music. I don't know why that music is played, but after kind of hearing it a little bit too much, I feel like I want to like switch it to a different selection of music in that scene. And also the part where they're trying to, like, in the prison riot scene, they're trying to get to Rorschach. In the graphic novel, in order to get to him, the fat guy who sticks his arms in there, and they can't get to Rorschach, they end up cutting his throat. In the movie, they end up cutting his arms off with a power saw. They just get out of nowhere. And I hate to say this, but it reminds me of the first Saw movie, because in the Saw movie, we saw Dr. Gordon cutting off his foot, but we didn't completely see him cutting it off. We only barely see him cut off his foot in Saw. So, technically saying Watchmen is actually more graphic than the Saw movies. I'm not comparing them to Saw, but they are just more graphic than Saw. Another thing I didn't like, it really didn't go into the past of all the characters that much. It went into each and every single one of their pasts, but it really didn't go deeper like the graphic novel did. And that was one of the keys to the Watchmen movie. That's all I have to say. The bottom line is that I love the Watchmen adaptation. It is as closest as anyone could possibly get to the book. And Alan Moore could take a chance with this movie, for once. But anyway, Watchmen is a film worth seeing. I definitely recommend it to fans of the graphic novel. On my grading scale, on a scale of 1 to 10, I give Watchmen a 9.3, which is an A-. Okay, well, I'm done. It's 11:44 at night. I was at the movie theater for hours, so I'll leave you guys to do whatever. So, bye.
Why would I save the world? I no longer have any stake in it.
Do it for me. On the country run. Save us. And I'll whisper.